Welcome to Simply Explained English. I am Lisa.
And I'm Eric. Do you want to improve your English easily? If so, you're in the right place.
Okay, today we'll listen to a podcast about which skill is the most important: reading, listening, speaking, or writing.
The podcast is a bit challenging. We hope you will not find it very difficult to understand.
Let's listen to it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's podcast. I'm Jessica.
And I'm Mark. Hi, everybody. Today, we're exploring how the traditional approach to language education might be missing the mark entirely.
Oh, that's an intriguing perspective. Are you suggesting we've been going about language learning all wrong?
Well, not entirely wrong, but perhaps not as efficiently as we could be. You see, for years, language courses have emphasized reading and writing skills, often at the expense of speaking and listening. But recent research suggests this might not be the most effective approach for real-world language use.
That's fascinating. So, what does the research say about which skills we should be focusing on?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a linguistics professor at Stanford, argues that while all language skills are interconnected, listening and speaking should take priority, especially for beginners. She says, and I quote, "If you can't understand what's being said to you, it doesn't matter how well you can speak, read, or write. Comprehension is the foundation of communication."
That makes a lot of sense when you think about it. But surely there must be situations where reading and writing are more important, right?
Absolutely. Take James Chen, for example. He's a businessman who deals with international clients regularly. For him, reading and writing are crucial. He needs to understand complex contracts and craft persuasive emails. So it really depends on your goals and context.
So, it seems like there's no single solution. How do we determine which skills to focus on?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. Let's break it down skill by skill. Reading, for instance, exposes you to a wide range of vocabulary and grammatical structures. It's like a linguistic buffet. You can sample different styles and complexities at your own pace.
And I imagine it's particularly useful for academic or professional purposes.
Exactly. Now, listening is where things get really fascinating. It's not just about understanding words. It's about internalizing the rhythm and intonation of the language. It's like, well, imagine trying to dance without hearing the music. You might get the steps right, but you'd miss the soul of the dance.
Oh, that's a great analogy. So, how does speaking fit into this dance metaphor?
Speaking is like being the dancer. It's where you put everything together in real time. It's immediate, interactive, and often gives learners the biggest sense of achievement. But here's the kicker. It's also the skill that many find the most daunting. There's a fear in speaking a foreign language that doesn't exist with the other skills.
I can definitely relate to that. The fear of making mistakes can be paralyzing. But I've heard that embracing those mistakes is crucial for improvement.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's all part of the learning process. Now, let's not forget about writing. If speaking is like being a dancer, writing is like being a choreographer. You have time to plan, revise, and perfect your performance. It allows for a level of precision that's harder to achieve in speaking.
That's a really helpful way to think about it. So, given all this, how would you advise someone just starting their language learning journey?
Great question. I'd say the key is balance, but with a slight emphasis on listening and speaking, especially at the beginning. Start by immersing yourself in the sounds of the language. Podcasts, movies, music. Then practice speaking, even if it's just talking to yourself in the mirror. Don't worry about perfection. Focus on communication.
That sounds like solid advice. But how do you know if you're making progress?
Well, that's where things get interesting. Progress in language learning isn't always linear. Sometimes it feels like you're not improving at all, and then suddenly you have a breakthrough. It's like, well, imagine you're trying to see a magic eye picture. You stare and nothing happens, and then suddenly the 3D image pops out at you.
Oh, I remember those. They were so frustrating until suddenly they weren't.
Exactly. Now, let's test our understanding with a quick question. What are 3 key benefits of focusing on listening skills in language learning? Think about it for a moment.
Well, based on what we've discussed, I'd say internalizing the rhythm and intonation of the language, improving overall comprehension, and, oh, preparing for real time communication. How'd I do?
That's exactly right. You've clearly been paying attention. Now, let's dive a bit deeper. How would you explain how these four language skills work together to someone who's never studied a foreign language? Take a moment to think about it.
Well, I'd probably use a metaphor. Maybe something like learning a language is like building a house. Reading and listening are like gathering the materials, the bricks and mortar of vocabulary and grammar. Speaking and writing are like actually constructing the house, using those materials in different ways. And just like you need both materials and construction skills to build a sturdy house, you need all four language skills to build fluency.
Wow, that's an excellent analogy. You've really captured the essence of how these skills work together. And it highlights why a balanced approach is so important. You know, it's fascinating how our understanding of language learning has evolved over the years.
Oh, how so?
Well, traditional language education often focused heavily on grammar rules and vocabulary memorization, but recent research in neurolinguistics suggests that our brains acquire language better by talking with others and understanding what they hear. It's why immersion programs can be so effective.
That's really interesting. So, does this mean textbooks and grammar drills are obsolete?
Not necessarily. They still have their place, especially for understanding the structure of the language. But they shouldn't be the primary focus. The key is to use them as tools to support your real-world language use, not as ends in themselves.
I see. So, it's about finding the right balance and approach for your individual goals and learning style.
Exactly. And that's really the takeaway here. There's no one most important skill in language learning. They're all interconnected and valuable. The key is to approach language learning holistically, with a slight emphasis on the skills that align with your goals.
Well, this has been incredibly insightful. Any final thoughts for our listeners who might be embarking on their own language learning journeys?
Yes, absolutely. Remember, language learning is a marathon, not a sprint. Be patient with yourself, celebrate small victories, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Each error is an opportunity to learn. And most importantly, find ways to make the process enjoyable. Whether it's watching foreign films, joining language exchange groups, or reading comics in your target language, the more fun you're having, the more likely you are to stick with it.
That's great advice. And I think it's a perfect note to end on. Thank you for this fascinating discussion on language learning.
It's been my pleasure. And to all our listeners out there, bonne chance, buena suerte, and good luck with your language learning adventures.
Lisa, what did you think about the podcast? I like the idea of focusing on listening and speaking first.
Me too. It reminded me that speaking can feel easier if you practice listening a lot.
Same here. I think I'll try listening to more podcasts and watching movies.
Great idea. Let's start our word so that our listeners can improve their listening by learning new vocabulary.
Yes, let's do that.
What are the words today, Eric?
The first word today is to determine. Then we will continue with given and interconnected. Then to highlight. And the final one is miss the mark.
Let's start with the first word.
The first word is to determine.
To determine.
To determine is a verb. It means to find out or decide something after thinking about it carefully or checking information.
For example, you might determine the best time to take a trip by looking at the weather forecast. Another example. The teacher will determine the winner of the art contest. This means the teacher will decide who the winner is.
Good one. Here's another example. We need to determine the cause of the problem. This means we need to find out why the problem happened.
Oh, so it's often used in formal or serious situations?
Yes, but you can also use it in everyday conversations when the context fits. For example, I'm trying to determine which movie to watch tonight. That's casual.
Definitely. Let me try an example. The doctor determined that I needed more rest. Does that work?
Perfect. The doctor figured out the problem and made a decision about what you need. It's a useful word when talking about decisions or solutions.
Okay, well, I think now our listeners understand the word to determine better. Shall we move on to the next word?
Let's do that. The next word is given.
Given.
Given has a few meanings, but we'll focus on given as a preposition. Given means because of or considering something. We use it when we want to explain why something is true or why we're making a decision.
Oh, like when we say, given the time, we should leave now. That means because of the time, or if you consider the time, it's a good idea to leave now.
Perfect example. Here's another one. Given his experience, he is the best person for the job. This means because of his experience, or if you consider his experience, he is the best person to do the job.
Here's another example. Given the weather, the event will be indoors. This means that because the weather was bad, they decided to have the event inside.
Let's talk about using given in sentences. It's often followed by a noun or noun phrase, like given the situation or given these facts. It's great for explaining decisions or reasons.
Yes, and it's a formal way to say because of. It's very useful in professional or academic writing, too.
So, given as a preposition is all about explaining reasons or causes. It's simple, but very effective.
Okay, well, I think we'll explain given pretty well. Let's move on to the next word.
The next word is interconnected.
Interconnected.
Interconnected is an adjective, and it means that things are connected to each other in some way. They depend on or affect each other.
Oh, like when we say, the internet has made the world interconnected. It means people and places around the world are now linked because of the internet.
Exactly. Here's an example sentence. All the systems in the human body are interconnected. This means the systems, like the heart and lungs, work together and affect each other.
Here's another example. In a city, the roads, buses, and trains are interconnected. This means they are linked together to help people get around.
Let's talk about how interconnected is used. It often describes systems, networks, or things that work together, like technology, nature, or even ideas.
That's right. You can also use it to talk about relationships, like interconnected families, meaning families that are connected or related to each other in some way.
So remember, interconnected is a helpful word when you want to describe things that are linked or dependent on one another.
Okay, well, I think now let's move on to our next phrase.
The next word is to highlight.
To highlight.
The verb to highlight means to bring attention to something or to make it more noticeable. For example, if you're reading a book, you might use a bright yellow marker to highlight the important sentences.
So it's like saying, this part is really important. Look here.
Exactly, Lisa. You can also use highlight when speaking. For instance, if you're giving a presentation, you might say, I want to highlight our achievements this year.
So it's not just about marking words on paper. You can also highlight ideas when you talk or write.
Exactly. Let's share a few examples to make it clear. The teacher highlighted the main points of the lesson so we could understand better. During the meeting, I highlighted the problems we need to solve.
I like those examples. Here's another one. Can you highlight the changes in this document? That's something I often hear at work.
Perfect. Now, let's talk about grammar. When you use to highlight, it's usually followed by a noun or noun phrase, like highlight the problem or highlight the benefits. So, to highlight is a great way to talk about making something stand out or drawing attention to what really matters.
Okay. Well, that's it for the word highlight. And now, our last word of today. What is the last word, Eric?
The last word is miss the mark.
Miss the mark.
Miss the mark is an idiom. It means to fail to reach a goal or to not get something right. Imagine you're playing a game of darts. If your dart doesn't hit the target, it misses the mark.
It's like saying, you didn't quite get it right.
Exactly. But it's not just about sports. You can use miss the mark to describe anything that didn't go as planned. For example, if a movie was supposed to be funny but wasn't, you could say, that movie really missed the mark.
Got it. So it's a way to say something didn't succeed or didn't meet the goal.
Let's look at some examples. The advertising campaign missed the mark because it didn't connect with the audience. I tried to guess her favorite color, but I missed the mark. She likes green, not blue.
Here's another one. The speech missed the mark because it was too long and hard to follow.
Perfect example, Lisa. Did you notice how miss the mark is often used when we're describing why something failed?
Yes, and it can be about big things, like a project, or small things, like a wrong guess.
That's right. It's often used in formal and informal situations. You'll hear it in everyday conversations, and it's easy to use once you understand it.
I think our listeners understand what miss the mark means better now. Well, that's it for today's episode of Simply Explained English. We hope you found the words helpful and the explanations easy to understand.
Thanks for listening. Keep studying your English.
And stay tuned. Bye for now.